We're going to get started in a minute. Welcome, everyone. Hello, hello. Give me 1 second. Happy Thursday, everyone. Rabbi Joel Nickerson, thanks for joining me for another session of Talmud Tales. Those of you who are on this Zoom, just a few reminders for Zoom protocol. This is set up as a webinar, so you'll see on the bottom, you are muted and your video is off for now. There will be a point a little later on where if you have questions or comments, we'll open it up for that. And you also will see on the bottom of your screen a Q&A option. So if you have a question that's burning as we're going through this learning together and you want to ask it, no guarantee I'll be able to answer the questions per se, but we'll see how this goes. Continually, all of us continuing to learn this new technology. So you can always add a question there if you'd like to, and you can also chat. But you will see in the chat, you should already have access to the resource page. I will just send it all again. I don't know if everyone has access, but you can find the resource to this text study started in a minute, as well as resources to all the other learning that we are doing at Wilshire Boulevard Temple at our website, wbtla.org/WBT@home. And you can find there, you'll see on the side, we have study at home, and within that we have resources, but I think still on the main WBT at home page, if you scroll down, you'll find access to today's source sheet. All right, and as well as past source sheets and some of the other learning that's going on. There's a lot of things that we're continually providing. There are going to be a variety of Passover resources, a few live seders that we're offering, one on the first night, one on the second night, both of them pretty family friendly, as well as a pre-recorded seder that you can use if you'd like, where you can pause it and listen to some of the music from Cantor Gurney and some commentary from Rabbi Nanis. That's another option. We have Haggadot for a variety of age groups on our website, and we're continuing to put more resources on as well. We'll be adding some recipes, some short videos. So lots of things to get you through Passover in this new setting this year. So let's begin with the study. Today, of course, we'll begin with the prayer for engaging in Torah. You can also find that on our resource page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotah v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for allowing us to engage in Torah. So we're going to begin today. Today, I thought we could focus on a few tales related to the teacher, the famous Rabbi Hillel. And the reason I thought about that is because I think about one of my favorite parts of the Passover Seder, where I get to enjoy the Hillel sandwich, right? So if you look here, Rabbi Hillel has a prominent place in the Passover Seder with the institution of the so-called Hillel sandwich, known in Hebrew as korech. The last ritual prior to the eating of the festive meal, korech involves the joining together of matzah, bitter herbs, and the sweet paste known as choroset into a kind of sandwich, which is done in commemoration of Hillel's practice of eating those three together, right? So we're experiencing Passover in a very different way this year. And I think, just like Hillel's sandwich, it is a blending of the sweetness of this holiday season and the sweet memories that we hold on to during this time of year, and some sad memories as well. So then we have the bitter herbs, we have the maror, which is also part of this year's experience. Not only those who are no longer around our table physically, Even if we were able to gather together, they're no longer here physically. And so we're thinking about the people who used to sit around our Seder table. But there's also, of course, this bitterness that we are not joining together in the way that we would normally be joining together for Seder. We wouldn't be with our extended families. We wouldn't be with our friends. So there is that bitterness that also comes this year on Passover with the state of the world. And yet it's this blending of the sweetness and the bitterness that is both the human experience, this world's experience right now, and what Passover is all about. So I thought Hillel could be the frame for our study today. So I want us to look at a few stories about Hillel. He is a famous rabbi. There is, of course, the international organization. I worked for Hillel International, which is basically the Jewish organization on college campuses around the world. I worked at Stanford, and I also worked at the University of Pennsylvania for Hillel. So an incredible organization based on this idea of this famous rabbi. So we're going to look at a few stories from Hillel. And then, as I said in the beginning, at the end, if there are questions or comments, and I have more material than we're going to get to today, because I don't want this session to go on forever and ever, but I'm giving you more material so that over this next week, you can enjoy a little bit more learning about Hillel, and maybe you can incorporate a little of your teaching into your own Seder, whatever that may look like. Maybe when it gets to the place where we eat korech, where we eat the Hillel sandwich, now you can add a little something about Hillel or one of the takeaways that you get from today's session. Okay, let's dive into the first text. First text. BT, by the way, means Babylonian Talmud, from Yoma 35b. As I've done in the past sessions, we'll read it straight through, and then we'll come back and try and break it down a little, okay? They said about Hillel the elder that each and every day he would work and earn a half dinar, half of which he would give to the guard of the study hall, and half of which he spent for his sustenance and the sustenance of the members of his family. One time he did not find employment to earn a wage, and the guard of the study hall did not allow him to enter. He ascended to the roof, suspended himself, and sat at the edge of the skylight in order to hear the words of the Torah of the living God from the mouths of Shemaiah and Avtalion, the spiritual leaders of that generation. The sages continued and said, that day was Shabbat Eve, and it was the winter season of Tevet, and snow fell upon him from the sky. When it was dawn, Shemaiah said to Avtalion, Avtalion, my brother, every day at this hour, the study hall is already bright from the sunlight streaming through the skylight, and today it is dark. Is it perhaps a cloudy day? They focused their eyes and saw the image of a man in the skylight. They ascended and found him covered with snow 3 cubits high. They extricated him from the snow, and they washed him and smeared oil on him, and they sat him opposite the bonfire to warm him. They said, this man is worthy for us to desecrate Shabbat for him. Saving a life overrides Shabbat in any case. However, this great man is especially deserving. Clearly, poverty is no excuse for the failure to attempt to study Torah. So that's story number one. So let's go back and break down a little. Hillel the Elder, just a little bit of background about Hillel the Elder. It's thought that maybe he was born around 110 BCE. Of course, we don't know exactly, but in the century before the Common Era. Then he died in Jerusalem, and he's buried in northern Israel. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was the founder of the school of Hillel, which we'll hear more about in some of the subsequent stories. Very famous rabbi. So this is a story from his earlier life, okay? He is working, he's a poor rabbi, he's a poor guy. He can't even really afford much of anything, but even the little that he can afford, half of which he gives away. He gives away half of it to the guard of the study hall. He gives tzedakah, and then the rest he takes care of himself and members of his family. So we already get a sense from the very beginning that this is a man who is generous, who's gracious, and who also, even despite his lack of wealth, was willing to go every single day to work hard so he could go to that study hall. And one time he didn't find employment, so he's unemployed, And I think the number, wow, was today 6.6 million people who have filed for unemployment in this country. There are a lot of people out of work in this country right now. And think about, of course, around the world, how many more. This idea that there is such anxiety around what's going to happen in our country with all of these people who don't have jobs. What is it all going to look like in the future? We don't know. Okay, but even here we have an example of an unemployed person right here from thousands of years ago. And so let's see what he does. He could not find employment to earn a wage, and the guard of the study hall did not allow him to enter. He couldn't enter the study hall. So what does he do? He goes to the roof. If you remember from our first session together, if you were on that, and if not, you can go back and look at the story, that also included a roof. And if you remember from our first session, this idea of the roof being a place of insecurity, a place that is both elevated and yet at the same time outside, right? Here we have this man who is not very wealthy at all, who doesn't have a job, who wants to study, who wants to learn, who wants to do good in the world. And yet he doesn't have access to those things, partly because he doesn't have a job. And then again, that is a statement about the fact that there are so many people who aren't having access to the supplies and the needs that they want right now, and the need for us to do everything we can to support them. And yet here he is so committed that he's willing to climb up onto the roof of the study hall of the yeshiva so that he can be as close as possible to the learning that's happening down below underneath him. Okay, so he's going on to the roof. He suspends himself there, and he sat on the edge of the skylight in order to hear the words of the Torah of the living God from the mouths of these two spiritual leaders. He wants to hear from those leaders. The sages continue, and it was Shabbat Eve, and it was the winter season, so it started to snow. So there's this guy, it's Friday night. Instead of being home with his family, he's there on the roof learning Torah. The next morning, this is now Shabbat morning, these two great sages, one says to the other, you know, by this time in the day, it's usually pretty nice outside. Even, I guess, even when it's snowing, there's usually sunlight coming through. Is it a cloudy day today? And they look up and they see an image of a man in the skylight, right? This man who I think about it figuratively, this man who wants to be gaining access and yet is held back, is suspended from having access to the learning. And they went up to the roof and they found him covered with tons of snow, right? And they extricated him from the snow and they washed him and they sat him next to the bonfire to warm him up. And they said, this guy is so worthy of us to desecrate Shabbat, because remember, on Shabbat, there are certain things you're not supposed to do. But of course, they were willing to break the rules of Shabbat in order to help this man. Saving life, as we know, and this is an important teaching that we find here and in other places, saving life overrides Shabbat in any case. However, this guy extra deserves to have his life saved. And also, poverty is no excuse for the failure to attempt to study Torah. Poverty is no excuse. There, on one level, this is talking about poverty in terms of financial poverty, that everyone should have access to learning Torah, that it is an equal opportunity partnership between humanity and Torah and the wisdom of Torah, and that they go together no matter where you are in our societal structure. However, I think on another level, this is also about a poverty spiritually and emotionally. Hillel the elder in this story is set apart. He is isolated. This is a theme I keep coming back to all the time these days, is this idea of isolation, because so many of us are isolated in so many ways. But this is saying that everyone should have access, that there should be no poverty when it comes to your opportunity to learn something new. This is not a time for us to feel impoverished, to be feeling as though we have no capability to learn new things not just intellectually. It's not just about getting new books on our Kindle or checking out a few books online or reading the newspaper a little more. This is about, can we delve into spiritual enrichment? How can we start to not just feel impoverished intellectually and spend time reading, but how can we start to strengthen our soul? How can we start to figure out what are some strategies that we can deal with for these next months? I know LAUSD just said they are not going to be returning to classes. Students are not going to return to classes basically the rest of this school year. So pretty much, at least here in Los Angeles, the rest of the school year, families are going to be hunkered down with their children at home. And that is, it's going to be interesting. But this is our opportunity to not feel impoverished intellectually or spiritually. This is the time to get to not just sit on the roof, but how can we find our way into that study hall? And it shouldn't have to be by freezing and feeling like an outsider and then finally being brought in. This is going to take each one of us finding the ways to enrich ourselves. So that's a little bit of the takeaway that I take from this story. This idea, this is not a time to feel impoverished, even though we may feel the desire or the tendency to feel like there are many things we cannot do. This is such a great opportunity to be building up ourselves and to look through those skylights into the places that maybe we have been ignoring or we didn't even know existed. So how can you make sure that you're taking the time to do that? Okay, let's move on to the next story in a second, though I just saw that there, thought I saw something. Isn't a guideline of Shabbat to invite the stranger? Yes, I mean, yeah, there, for example, even on Passover, right? We bring in Elijah. I don't know if it's necessarily a law to invite the stranger, but there, and I guess what you're getting at is potentially this idea that why weren't they letting him into the study hall? Yes, there is this concept that we are supposed to invite the stranger. And I mean, it goes back, especially as we're coming up on Passover, this idea that we were strangers in the land of Egypt. It's one of the, I think it is the most repeated phrase in the Torah. 30 something times you find in the Torah, we were strangers in the land of Egypt. This idea that we were strangers and therefore our responsibility to care for anyone who is like a stranger. And I think right now we have the opportunity to make sure that the people who we don't know, and even the people we do know, don't feel like strangers, right? All these walking around the neighborhood, the people who were our neighbors, who were our strangers, who were strangers to us for so long. Now is our time for our neighbors no longer to be our strangers, right? But to be our true neighbors, to get back to the root of what it means to have a neighbor. There are a lot of Jewish laws about your neighbor, about your property and your neighbor's property, about public space and private space. This is a time for us to hopefully maybe as a society to transfer back toward the neighborhood feeling. Okay, let's move on to the next story. Next story, coming to us from the section about Shabbat. The sages taught in a Baraita, that means a story, the basic mitzvah of Hanukkah, and this is a famous one, you may have heard this one also. The basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is each day to have a light kindled by a person, the head of the household, for himself and his household. And the Mahadrin, i.e. those who are meticulous in the performance of mitzvot, kindle a light for each and every one in the household. And that's why you find in some families, you find a Hanukkah for each person, not just one for the entire family, but one for each member of the family, right? And those who are really, really strict, who are even more meticulous, adjust the number of lights daily. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree as to the nature of that adjustment. Beit Shammai says, on the first day, one kindles 8 lights, and from there on, gradually decreases the number of lights until on the last day of Hanukkah, he kindles 1 light. And Beit Hillel says, Beit Hillel, meaning the house of Hillel, says on the first day, one kindles 1 light, and from there on gradually increases the number of lights until on the last day, he kindles 8 lights. Okay, so here we have this idea, this is the famous story, you may have heard this, as to why we add a light every night to the Hanukkah, as opposed to starting with nights and having all 8 candles up on our Hanukkah and then taking one away. And Shammai's idea was that, well, the miracle slowly decreases over time because it only lasted 8 days. So it lasted for 8 days, and then slowly we lose some of that miracle. And Hillel's take was that you only increase the joy and the importance of that miracle every single night, right? You go from the darkness to the light. And that's why I thought this story was so important, even though we are far from Hanukkah. This is a story about amongst the darkness, you have two choices. You can either see that the darkness is encroaching upon you and becoming more and more forceful, or you can see that amongst the darkness, there is the opportunity to bring more light into that darkness. And Hillel, the brilliance of Hillel here is this idea that Hanukkah, of course, takes place during the darkest time of the year, but right now we are in a very dark time as well. And we can either see that we are entering a black hole where darkness will continue to creep in on us individually and collectively, or we can see this as an opportunity individually and collectively to bring more and more light into this darkness. And we can do that in a variety of different ways. And mostly that's going to be up to you as an individual to figure out how you want to do that. How are you going to bring light? But we have it from Hillel way back when. This idea that as a Jew, our responsibility is to bring more light into that world, no matter what darkness is around us. I did a Shiva minyan last night on Zoom. And unfortunately, there are many Shiva minyans that are happening on Zoom these days. But the fact that there were all these people on the screen, you know, I could see every single family and all the family members and all the friends who are gathered there. And we had a complete Shiva minyan. I did all the prayers, and then we opened it up just like we would do if we were all gathered together in one place for people to share stories about the deceased. And it was beautiful. And I could still feel the same beauty and love and caring that all the guests had for the deceased family and for the mourners, almost the same way that you could when you are there physically. Now, of course, it's different, but the intention was there. And so we still have the capacity to bring our intentionality, our kavanah, as we would say in Judaism, from a prayer perspective, this idea of kavanah, of intention. This is our opportunity to bring our intention of bringing more light into the darkness, to make sure that the darkness is not encroaching. So we get that from Hillel, Rabbi Hillel. That's a little bit about that one. Okay, let's go on to the next story. From Eruvin 13b. Rabbi Abba said that Shmuel said, sometimes the rabbis like to say something in the name of someone else, It's kind of like telephone. For 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed. They said the halakha is in accordance with our opinion, and these said the halakha, the Jewish law, is in accordance with our opinion. Ultimately, a divine voice emerged and proclaimed, both these and those are the words of the living God. However, the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. The Gemara, that means the Talmud, asks, since both these and those are the words of the living God, why were Beit Hillel privileged to have the halakha established in accordance with their opinion? The reason is that they were agreeable and forbearing, showing restraint when affronted. And when they taught the halakha, they would teach both their own statements and the statements of Beit Shammai. Moreover, when they formulated their teachings and cited a dispute, they prioritized the statements of Beit Shammai to their own statements in deference to Beit Shammai. Okay, so let's go back. This is a really important teaching about how Jews argue. Okay, really important, because we do a lot of that. We've been doing that for thousands of years. We continue to do that. So this is the story of Hillel and Shammai from this section right here. Helps us understand how we're supposed to argue in Jewish way. So basically, we have these two houses with this. These are the same houses that continually go at each other throughout the Talmud. Beit meaning house, Shammai. So there was a Rabbi Shammai, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel, and they disagree about almost everything. The halakha, one says, no, it should go according to us. Everyone should follow our rules, the way we interpret this. And the other would say, no. Finally, a divine voice emerged and proclaimed, both these and those are the words of the living God. However, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. Okay, this is the first thing that I think is important to point out. Both these and those are the words of the living God. A heavenly voice comes down, right, and is interrupting an argument to say both perspectives are important and valid. Very easy for us to just negate a different perspective and not even consider it. Here, now, of course, this isn't about any argument. These were arguments, these were positions that these two houses spent a lot of time doing research. It's just not an off-the-cuff comment or opinion. This is, based on some research or based on knowing what you're talking about, which doesn't always happen today, but is already a comment on, if you are going to give opinions on something, do a little research first. Don't just make off-the-cuff opinions about things without knowing what you're talking about. And if you are going to do that, at least make sure you're basing it by saying, this is an off-the-cuff opinion based on just how I'm feeling. But our tradition is teaching us, number one, if you're going to make an argument, do your research for it. And when you do that, and there are two people who are presenting arguments or positions that are counter to one another, there is validity in both of them. You have to find them. You have to find that validity. And according to this, so Hillel was a little bit more valid than Shammai. But why is that? What is it about Shammai's position? Because you would think, my God, a voice from God is saying that they're both right. How are we going to solve any argument if both of these positions are correct? But this is where it comes down to how we win an argument according to Jewish tradition, or the most valid way of going about doing this, a way in which you can actually really sink your teeth into an argument, is found here. Both these and those are the words of the living God. But why was Beit Hillel privileged? The reason is that they were agreeable and forbearing, showing restraint when affronted. And when they taught the halacha, they would teach both their own statement and the statements of Beit Shammai. And moreover, when they formulated their teachings and cited a dispute, they prioritized the statements of Beit Shammai to their own statements in deference to Beit Shammai. So let's review this. So this is the guide to making sure we understand how we're supposed to argue and have disputes in our tradition. They were agreeable and forbearing. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. They showed restraint when affronted. When someone was attacking them, they didn't just attack right back. They showed restraint, as hard as that could be. And then when they taught halacha, they would teach both perspectives, not just their own. They would bring both sides of the argument together and present both of them. Moreover, when they formulated their teachings, they prioritized the statements of the other position before their own, in deference to that other group. That, I think, is such a great guide to how we are supposed to argue. And it's not just when we're studying Torah and sitting down and two people are looking at a piece of text. I have taken this in really to my heart and soul in terms of how I want to understand how I relate to other people. Number one, can we be as agreeable as possible? And how can you make sure that if you know you're walking into something, and even if you don't, that as soon as you are in some kind of dispute, is there a way, whether it's a deep breath, whether it's remembering this text, whatever it may be, can you be as agreeable as possible? Second of all, what was it on the second thing? Showing restraint. When you get attacked and someone's coming at you, not physically, of course, can you show some kind of restraint? Can you even just physically, again, take a deep breath and sit back and not get into it the same way this other person is? And then they taught both positions. If we are going to be disputing, and there's already been a lot, even before this Corona crisis, of course, we were all caught up in the politics of the next election. And we were seeing it even in the debates among the Democrats. And of course, we were looking forward to what was going to happen once a Democratic nominee was going up against Trump, and what are those debates going to look like? And eventually that's going to happen. And it's going to be really interesting to see how our democracy moves forward through this coronavirus towards an election. in November. We'll see how that's going to go. But how can we make sure that both arguments are presented, both positions are presented? And then, of course, this I think is the kicker here, was that Hillel would always offer the other perspective before their own, right? It's an interesting strategy to take, and I want you to think about this in the way you argue in your own disputes. How often are you putting the other person's perspective and talking about that and validating that perspective before you then offer your own? Because that's I think a really key teaching that's going on here. Sean, you raised your hand. Go ahead. What do you got? Can you? Oh, wait, hold on. You're muted. Unmute. I don't know. Can you hear me? Can you talk? Sean? Nope. Guess not. Sean raised his hand, but now I guess he's not talking. Okay. That is not a way to argue. You don't be silent when you're trying to argue. You have to present your position. Of course, you present the other position first. So giving you a hard time, Sean. Okay, we're moving on. So those are a few things that I think are really key from this incredible teaching about machloket. Machloket is argumentation and disagreement in our tradition. And this is the key one used. This is the key text used to help explain not only how we are supposed to argue when we're studying Torah, but how we're supposed to get through disputes in life. And I think it's such a great teaching. So I hope you can try and bring it into your own life a little. Okay, let's move on to another text. I'm aware of time. We're probably not necessarily going to get through this whole text. I brought the whole one, but there are elements of this. There's just a hint to what's to come. If we were to zoom ahead, this is the text. See, this is really long. We're not going to be able to get through all of this. No, maybe it's up here. Sorry about that. Convert me on 1 foot on the condition you teach me the entire Torah while standing on 1 foot. That's a famous one, but we're going to come back to that. We're just going to get through the first piece before that. I think it's always important to understand context. And of course, I'm taking a lot of these stories out of context in the sense that most of the stories that we're reviewing are part of a much longer conversation. The Talmud is full of conversations that take place and go in all kinds of different directions, mostly about law. And then periodically we have these stories interwoven within them. Okay, so here in the section about Shabbat, we have this. The sages taught, there was an incident involving one Gentile who came before Shammai. The Gentile said to Shammai, how many Torahs do you have? He said to him, 2, the written Torah and the oral Torah. The Gentile said to him, with regard to the written Torah, I believe you, but with regard to the oral Torah, I don't believe you. Convert me on condition that you will teach me only the written Torah. Shammai scolded him and cast him out with reprimand. The same Gentile came before Hillel, who converted him and began teaching him Torah. On the first day, he showed him the letters of the alphabet and said to him, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. The next day, he reversed the order of the letters and told him that an Aleph is a Tav, and so on. The convert said to him, but yesterday, you did not tell me that. Hillel said to him, you see that it is impossible to learn what is written without relying on an oral tradition. Didn't you rely on me? Therefore, you should also rely on me with regard to the matter of the oral Torah and accept the interpretations that it contains. Okay, this is story 1. This is the one that you may not have heard about, right? Because this one is followed by the famous one, which we're going to get to in a second. Okay, let's just break this down, because this is showing the difference between Shammai and Hillel in terms of how you understand how to bring someone into the tradition. How do you decide whether or not someone is worthy of entering through conversion the Jewish people? We have Shammai who says, the Gentile asks, this non-Jew asks a great question. How many Torahs are there? And of course, there are 2 Torahs. And as Shammai says, there's the written Torah and the oral Torah. And just for those of you who may not be as familiar with this idea, the idea of the written Torah is the 5 books of Moses, the Torah that you find in a sanctuary in every synagogue. That is the written Torah. as well as the prophets and the writings. And then there's the oral Torah. The oral Torah is the Talmud. The oral Torah represents all the things that were passed down orally through the generations, and then were finally written down, such as the Shulchan Aruch and other law codes besides the Talmud that exist in our tradition. And in the most traditional understanding of revelation, and revelation is a word used to describe what happened at Mount Sinai and how we received the Torah. The most traditional understanding is that at Mount Sinai, we didn't just receive the written Torah, the Torah scroll that we have in the sanctuary, but we also received all of the other traditions, the oral traditions, such as the Talmud. So all of that, and therefore what we do by that legalistically is that we put the Talmud and some of these other books and these other teachings on par, almost on par. Technically, they're not exactly on par, but they are in the same group of validity and importance as the written Torah itself, right? So together, the written and the oral Torah comprise traditionally of what we received at Mount Sinai, and therefore have significant validity. That's why you don't see people continuing to add to the Torah, the written Torah, or you don't see them adding to the Talmud. You find a lot of new responsa, which is the way of seeing what's happening in the world around us and writing legal codes to explain how we live in the modern world through Jewish law, but you don't see people adding to the Talmud. You can't add new sections to the Talmud. The Talmud has been codified, that's the word used, codified at this point, you can't add to it. Okay, so that's the oral and the written. That's just a quick little background on that. So back to the story. The Gentiles said, with regard to the written Torah, okay, I get you, I believe you, but when it comes to this whole oral Torah thing, I don't really believe you. I don't think that technically counts as an oral Torah, which, by the way, is a valid argument. I would say it's probably a liberal Jew's perspective, that there is a difference in terms of the level of validity. Not validity is the wrong word, but maybe the level of significance by which we hold the Torah, the written Torah versus the oral Torah. And Shammai scolded him and cast him out with reprimand. And so this guy comes to Hillel, and Hillel starts converting him and begins teaching him Torah right away. It doesn't reprimand him. And on the first day, he shows him these letters of the alphabet, and he talks to him about the letters. And the next day he reverses them, and he reverses the order and kind of throws everything off that he had taught him before. And so the convert, understandably, notices this contradiction and said, this makes no sense to me. What are you saying? And Hillel says, well, now you see it's impossible to learn what is written without relying on the oral tradition of what I'm teaching you, of what I'm saying to you. You know, there's certain things that are written down, literally written down, but there's also the teaching that comes from when you speak and when you are engaging in learning with someone else. So didn't you rely on me? And therefore you should rely on me with regard to the oral Torah and accept the interpretations as well. Right? A really important teaching that there is the difference in the styles of learning between learning something that is written down in a book or written down as a law versus what comes from learning in an engaging in a relationship or a teacher and a student relationship, right? And it's this, the way I think of this is it's the same thing that is told about mostly college, right? Where there's a lot you learn when you go to class, but the real learning that occurs in college is everything that happens outside the classroom. It's the relationships you have with your professors and what you learn from them going to office hours, and when you learn by being in relationship with people who you see as mentors. It's about the relationships with your peers, right? All of these things that we learn. So here is an important lesson that there are multiple ways in which we learn, right? And I think about it in the context of what's happening right now. There are those stats that we see on the TV of how many people are dying around the world and how many people are dying in our country or maybe in your own city. And then there is what we learn from how we are treating one another and what we learn from our leaders, from what their interpretations of those numbers and how we are supposed to move forward with these statistics. There's a whole other layer of learning that occurs. It's not just what's written down. It's about all the things that come with that. The oral Torah is, according to Hillel, all those other pieces that kind of surround the written Torah. And similarly, when we are learning anything, we have to recognize that there is what is written down, and there's also all the things that come with it. I had a class in rabbinical school all about commentaries, where all we did for an entire semester was study different Torah commentaries. And the whole idea, because you might have a Torah commentary at a synagogue, and you might just think, okay, that's just the commentary and the way it goes. But there are so many commentaries. And of course, every commentary comes, and a commentary, their interpretation of the Torah and each word. And every commentary comes with a different perspective based on the editors, based on the time it was written. So much. So I think that's one of the important things from this part of the story. But now let's end with this one. There was another incident involving one Gentile who came before Shammai and said to Shammai, "Convert me on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I am standing on one foot." Shammai pushed him away with the builder's cubit in his hand. This was a common measuring stick, and Shammai was a builder by trade. A lot of the rabbis were also, workers. They actually had actual jobs. Maimonides, for example, being a doctor, right? So it wasn't just that they sat around and were rabbis. I'm very lucky that I get to be a full-time rabbi in this world today. It wasn't always the case. That was the side gig for many. The same Gentile came before Hillel. He converted him and said to him, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to another." That is the entire Torah, and the rest is its interpretation. Go study, okay? Famous story. Of course, Shammai, who maybe you don't remember this part as much, Shammai literally beats the guy away and beats him with a stick. And of course, Hillel converts him and says, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to another." This is the reverse of the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would want done to you. So I want you to think about what is the difference between that and do not do unto others as you would not want done unto you. That's, according to Hillel, the major teaching of the Torah, and everything else is interpretation on that, right? How we treat ourselves, how we treat other people, right now is such a key time for us to be thinking about. We're not having a ton of interaction with a lot of people face to face. It's those awkward interactions we may have when we go to the grocery store where people are physically separated. But what do you want to make sure that you don't do to others that you wouldn't want done to you? And how can we use that as a frame by how we are supposed to navigate this time? But even more importantly, once we come out of our shells, as I said last week, when we come out of that cave, how are we going to be treating ourselves, and how are we going to be treating the people around us? I just want to end, before we take a couple questions and comments, if there are any, there are a couple others. You can read this on your own. Finally, the Gemara relates, eventually the three converts, because there are three stories, we only read two of them. There's another longer one, which you can read on your own. Eventually, the three converts gathered together in one place, and they said, "Shammai's impatience sought to drive us from the world. Hillel's patience brought us beneath the wings of the divine presence." Patience. There is such a need for patience right now, and it's hard to be patient when we don't know what's coming next, and when we have lives that we want to lead. And I think about all the people, the weddings I was supposed to do, the B'nai Mitzvah that are getting postponed. Of course, all the other secular things in people's lives that they are looking forward to. And yet we are supposed to find patience, because when we have patience, there is something that brings us closer to the divine. And that may seem a little esoteric at this moment, but I believe it. I know I'm doing the work to try and find that patience. And I'm not just talking about the patience of dealing with my three daughters running around our small house and how to deal with that. I'm also talking about a spiritual patience, a deeper patience, a patience for acceptance that there are things out of our control, but yet we find ways of finding control amidst this chaos. And the role of patience to bring us closer to what really matters, I think, is a really important teaching. So I want to, at this point, open it up. If there are questions, comments, anything people want to add, any disagreements with anything I've said, I just wanted to open up. So you have below, you have the chat function, you have the Q&A function. If anyone wants to add anything, or you can virtually raise your hand as well. But just wanted to open it up for a second to see if anyone had anything they wanted to say. Okay, interesting. For a group of Jews. Oh, Sean. Hi, Rabbi. Sean, why don't you, let's see if we can get you to talk, if you're okay with that. Let's see if I can do that. Sean, can you talk? Can you hear me? Unmute. Can you talk now? Your microphone is not plugged in. Yeah, you definitely need to get a microphone. So go ahead and type your question if you can. And while Sean is typing his question, if there's anyone else who has a question or comment, if not, we'll wait. Interesting choice of focus on Hillel and teachers, as many of us parents are doing double duty as teachers during the day now. Appreciate this insight. Yes, right now, of course, you were always a teacher as a parent, right? So it's interesting that now is the time where we think, now I have to be a teacher and a parent, when in fact, parenting is all about teaching, of course. But of course, what you're referring to is this idea of, it's a different type of teaching that we aren't necessarily prepared for as parents. We are prepared for the idea that there is a teaching that occurs through the modeling of our behavior, through our tone, through our priorities and how we spend our money and how we spend our time and how we treat our partner and how we create friend groups and how we are part of a community or not part of a community, right? All of these things. But there is this new element of what it means to be a teacher as well, which is really challenging. And I know even for teachers, people who are professional teachers, I've heard from them about the challenge of this new model of teaching. This is really tough on everyone, right? So, and I think we're learning an incredible amount about ourselves, about our own capabilities, our own capacity or lack of capacity for certain things. We are being exposed to new elements that I think in the end will be very good for us as a society to be able, if we can maintain some of these new ways of understanding how we learn about ourselves, but also how we teach others, right? Our relationships with our children is probably going to be changed, hopefully for the majority of people for the better. But Sean also asks, I don't understand how the oral tradition, which is merely the thinking of rabbis, can be viewed on the same level as the Torah, which is the direct statement of the Lord. By the way, this is Dan. The computer says Sean. Sorry, Dan. Dan, the idea of the oral tradition being the thinking of the rabbis, you're right. Technically, on one level, that is what it is. Now, this also goes into your whole theology, so that's a whole other section. And Dan, you and I could have our own Zoom time, you and I. And by the way, I want to put that out there for anyone. If anyone wants to just have a conversation about this or anything, please get in touch with me. We can do a Zoom time, and we can learn just like the good old days of learning in person. I'll have my cup of coffee, you can have your own cup of coffee, we'll Zoom and we can learn together and we can have a conversation about anything and everything. I really mean that. But the short answer to Dan's question about the oral tradition, yes, but your theology could also determine that the Torah, the written Torah, was written by humans as well. So part of this depends on your theology. And if you believe that the Torah was written by God, but that the oral tradition is written by humans, you have to go back and really try and wrap your head around what is the difference. How is it that the Torah was written by God, and how, yeah, okay, I see where you're coming from. The oral tradition is seen as bringing a lot of complexity and nuance to what the Torah does not offer. For example, when it comes to Shabbat, we don't get a lot of rules about how to honor Shabbat. We're told, honor Shabbat, keep Shabbat, but it doesn't go into all the details of how you actually do that. That's found in the oral tradition. That was found in the Mishnah, and then again in the Talmud, because the Mishnah came first, and that's a law code, oral tradition, that was then built upon, and that's called the Talmud. When the Mishnah and the interpretation of the Mishnah is put together, that's the Talmud. So a lot of the rules about how we live our Jewish lives that were set up a long time ago basically been formed as just as valuable and essential as the Torah itself. So that's the short answer. That's my short answer to that. So I hope that helps a little. And if you want to talk about it more, we can get together one-on-one. Any other thoughts or questions? I see under the Q&A up, Susan says, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Any other comments or questions? No? Okay. We'll be back next Thursday, even though it is Passover. I'm not going anywhere, and it might as well take a little time as the matzah is digesting to hang out and study a little more. So I'm thinking next week it might be part 1 of a part 2 series. We might go in depth into one of the longer stories. I'm not sure yet, haven't figured it out, but most likely we're going to be getting together next Thursday. If not, for some reason, we'll start back up the week after. But feel free to reach out. I'm wishing you a meaningful Passover, one in which you find elements of freedom and joy during this time where it's really hard to find this idea of freedom, but let's live it out. And let's use what we can learn from Hillel and his teachings and his demeanor to guide us, especially as we're eating that Hillel sandwich where we're combining both the bitterness, but also the sweetness. So Chag Sameach, and have a great rest of the week, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much.